Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the weekend of June the 20th and 21st, 2026. And this weekend, we have the solstice. In the Northern Hemisphere, it is the summer solstice, when the sun moves out of Gemini and into Cancer. And in the Northern Hemisphere, it is, of course, the longest day on Sunday, I think. Sunday is this day of the solstice. And in the Southern Hemisphere, it is the shortest day. So astrologically, it is a moment of real power. And I will be talking about the solstice quite a lot over the course of a video, and I will be talking about the solstice in general, and also how the solstice is going to impact each of the 12 signs. But I'm going to start by looking at the weekend in general, astrologically. So here is the chart of the weekend. Don't forget, by the way, to like and subscribe, if appropriate. So this chart is set for midnight on Sunday, June the 21st. So that is the middle of a weekend, New York time, and the moon at midnight is at 20 degrees 53 Virgo. And the moon, what's the moon doing? The moon is doing quite a lot. So the moon's making quite a lot of aspects over the weekend. It makes, what does it do? It makes a sextile to Mercury, it makes a trine to Mars, and it makes a sextile to Jupiter. So, those aspects are certainly fortunate. But we shouldn't forget that the moon is in Virgo for pretty much all the weekend. I mean, it is true that at 5 to 10 in the 5 to 10 in the evening London time, or 5 to 11 in the evening London time on Sunday, the moon moves into Libra. So on Sunday afternoon, if you're in the Americas, the moon moves into Libra. So okay, the moon is not in Virgo all weekend, but it's certainly in Virgo for most of the weekend. And so, with moon in Virgo, it's perhaps a time when we are aware of the material world. We are aware of what's in the material world. Virgo is a very health-orientated sign. We might be, sensitive to pollutants, chemicals, additives. We want sort of fresh air. If the air is bad, fumes, whatever, that can be a feature of the moon in Virgo. But it's not. All things being equal, moon in Virgo is not a particularly excitable sign, and by definition, it's fairly down to earth. And the moon's aspects to Mercury, Jupiter, and Mars, you could argue, are quite constructive. So if we want to get things together over the weekend, perhaps there's some unfinished business that's sort of hanging over from earlier in the week, I think we can. So it's quite a well organized weekend. I think it certainly can be with the moon in Virgo. Additionally, the moon in Virgo is arguably bringing together Mercury and Jupiter. So we have the beginnings of a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. And it's been building up for some time, but we've got Mercury at 23.5 Cancer, Jupiter at 28 Cancer. So they're less than 5 degrees apart. And so you might think, that's good. But this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction never happens. And the reason is because Mercury is really starting to slow down, and of course, the end of the month, it is nearly the end of the month, Mercury goes retrograde. And in fact, Mercury stays in Cancer until I think it's August the 10th. So although this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction never happens, you could argue that the moon kind of brings it together, because the moon makes sextile to Mercury, then it makes a sextile to Jupiter, and between those two sextiles it makes a trine to Mars. And so, the moon in a horoscope is function. I mean, it moves just much faster than anything else. Without the moon, nothing happens. There can be plenty of potential, but without the moon, nothing comes together. It's really important. And so perhaps Moon in Virgo, through our own efforts or through someone else's efforts, things can come together, and perhaps that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction and its potential can be fulfilled. So what is the potential of a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction? I mean, I think it's quite an optimistic influence. Okay, it's not super excitable because it's in Cancer, but it's just this quiet optimism and a quiet positivity, and the moon brings it together. And so in a way that is perhaps quite perhaps methodical, but things can come together in really quite a satisfactory way. And if you're talking about relationships, I mean it impacts relationships for everyone, but especially for the signs which are ruled by Mercury and Jupiter, which would be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. That Mercury-Jupiter conjunction can be about relationships, and so if relationships are important to you, it could be that Moon in Virgo, with its attention to detail and also being quite methodical, it can perhaps bring people together. Yeah, and those four signs may be particularly impacted by it, but I think everyone, regardless of your sign, I think relationships can really be improved and developed. But it is through one's own efforts, I think, or one's own efforts. That's not quite what I wanted to say. Just by a careful attention to detail. I mean, I know that relationships, and again, I'm talking about all kinds of relationships. Relationships are supposed to be spontaneous and so on, but still, you've got to very often do some preparation, and that might be how those aspects work. Now, as far as the balance of the activity in the weekend is concerned, really, most of the activity is on Sunday. On Saturday, there isn't a massive amount going on, at least on paper. When I look at the main aspects, at least from a sort of British summertime perspective, the emphasis does seem to be on Sunday rather than Saturday. And on Saturday, the main aspect is a biquintile between the Sun and Pluto. So the Sun and Pluto are 144 degrees apart. And when you're talking about biquintiles, these aspects, biquintiles, it's 144 degrees, which is 2/5 of a circle. So it's very much a number 5 aspect, and it's what we are trying to create. And it has an optionality to it, so it doesn't necessarily have to happen. But if we want to have an influence, if we want to bring to bear that Pluto energy, we can. If we want to create a transformation, we can, but it has to be prepared. We have to, and we also need to have that will. So we have to decide that we want something to happen, and that happens in our head. We make that decision. We are sure we want it to happen, and then we develop a plan, and we just go through it in a systematic way. So that Sun biquintile Pluto isn't necessarily very spontaneous. It might seem spontaneous. It seems powerful. So if you see people really trying to throw their weight around on Saturday, trying to have an influence, and it might seem all very dramatic and spur of the moment. I don't think it is spur of the moment necessarily. It might be carefully planned. So do think about it. Whether it is you trying to create change or whether it is someone else. Now, the main thing going on over the weekend is of course, the summer solstice, the sun moving into Cancer. And that is something I will talk about in a few minutes' time. But let me first of all just look at the planets. If we just set the chart for Australia or New Zealand, if we set the chart for Sydney, because the time difference between Sydney and New York is huge, and that's why I do have a separate chart for that, to take into account the fact that people do watch these videos from Australia and New Zealand and the Philippines and so forth. And so if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, the moon is is earlier in the sign. There it is. Moon is at 13 degrees Virgo, and that certainly means that the moon is going to be in Virgo, all weekend. And as far as what aspects the moon makes, I mean, the moon doesn't do a great deal on Saturday. So I'm not saying there's a huge amount of difference, by the way, between Australia and New Zealand and the United States, for example. At least this weekend, there isn't much of a difference. I mean, the moon will eventually make that trine to that sextile to Mercury, but that's not for quite a lot of time. And so I'm thinking that if you are in Australia or New Zealand, I think the weekend might take actually quite a long time to develop. Certainly longer than if you're in the Americas. So if you find that on Saturday and even much as Sunday, not much is going on, then don't be surprised, and you may be much more reliant on that Sun quintile Pluto. So if you were listening to me and when I was talking about that Sun quintile by quintile Pluto, that's about you having to make things happen. So if you are in Australia and New Zealand, I think it may be an uneventful or an even unsatisfactory weekend until right at the end, unless you have real willpower, unless you're prepared to really force things through. And then there is the heliocentric picture, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So there is the Earth. Earth is at 29 degrees 49 Sagittarius, and that just reminds us that in a heliocentric chart, the Earth is always opposition the Sun, and the Earth. You can see the Earth is making a trine to Mars. It might not seem obvious because heliocentric Mars has just moved into Taurus. I don't know about heliocentric signs, whether one should look at heliocentric signs. I believe that some astrologers who use heliocentric astrology, I think they use it. I think it is quite widely used, or used to be quite widely used, for those trying to make stock market predictions. And I think heliocentric sign changes were often seen as being important in financial astrology. I mean, don't quote me on that, but that was certainly something I remember when looking at the work of some heliocentric astrologers. I don't know how many astrologers are using the heliocentric approach, but the Earth is making a trine to Mars, and that trine to Mars may sort of stir things up. It may be a sort of a call for action. And so if action is important, we want to make things happen, then I think we can. I don't think there's anything else to report. I probably missed something, but so anyway, that's a heliocentric picture. And now I want to turn to the solstice. So the solstice is the moment when the sun peaks. When it's in the northern hemisphere, when we have sort of maximum hours of daylight, southern hemisphere minimum hours of daylight, and it's traditionally seen as being a moment of great power. And it's also the moment that, the sun goes into Cancer. There is a lot of confusion here. I think, when I look at the comments, you get some people talking about Ophiuchus and the 13th sign and so forth. And I don't quite get this obsession with Ophiuchus, because astrology, Western astrology, is not constellational, and there used to be these articles, maybe they still exist, but in the tabloid newspapers, I remember sort of in the 90s, every few years you'd have an article about how astrology is nonsense because the constellations don't line up. What about Ophiuchus and so on? But the reality is that Western astrology doesn't use constellations; it's seasonal. I know that sounds rather unromantic, but it is. It is seasonal, and the constellation of Cancer, well, I mean, it's good to know where it is, but the point is the sun goes into Cancer at the moment of the solstice, in the same way that the sun goes into Aries at the moment of the equinox, or likewise it goes into Libra at the moment of the other equinox, and with the sun in Capricorn, that's a solstice point. So that is how how the constellations work, certainly in terms of Western astrology, and thinking about Ophiuchus and 13 signs and constellational astrology. I think it's in a way it's quite whimsical. I mean, I know some people like to be different just for the sake of it. They like to have their own unique system, but don't worry about sort of Ophiuchus. It's kind of interesting, but not much more. Anyway, as far as the solstice is concerned, it is a moment of great power, and traditionally it is a moment of great power. Robert Graves in The White Goddess, the book that I will always at the time of solstice, I talk about Robert Graves and The White Goddess. So if you've been listening to my videos for a long time, and you'll perhaps have a certain sense of wariness as I repeat myself, but he had this sort of interesting idea in The White Goddess. So Robert Graves was a poet, and he was an academic, and he really understood the language of poetry, and he was very much into sort of mythology, and he talked about the tradition, how a king would be elected, and the king would have a deputy, the tanist, and I think if you're Irish, I believe that the deputy prime minister in Ireland, it's called something like the tanist or whatever. I mean, I don't know anything about Ireland, but I think that there's it is cognate with Celtic, is it? Anyway, so the king is elected and he has a deputy, and at the solstices, one of the solstices, I think it's the winter solstice, the king is torn apart, and he is killed in the most sort of horrific kind of way. I think he might even be eaten, and his tanist takes over from him, and then the tanist has 6 months of being king, and then the next solstice he likewise is killed, torn apart, and you have you elect or you choose a new king. So there is something quite sinister about the solstices, and this idea about sort of ancient practices, kind of reminiscent of the Wicker Man. But it is certainly a moment of power, and the precise moment of that solstice may be of occult significance. So here is the precise moment of the solstice. I've gone for 9:25. It might be 9:24. I looked at what's this? I looked at Mitchelson's Ephemeris. I think he said 9:24. 9:25 is another alternative. Do check if you're really into precise moments. But it's sometimes done that one wants to mark the solstice. One could have a moment of silence. One could have a ritual during the solstice. But I remember in the 80s. In the early 80s, going to Stonehenge, it was a festival. I don't know. There was a music festival. Hawkwind always used to turn up in the early 80s at Stonehenge, and it was a free festival, and it didn't have the commerciality of Glastonbury. It was something more sort of primal about it. And this was a time when the Stonehenge was not sort of fenced off. People would, at the time of the solstice, the druids would show up, and but the druids, there was a sort of, I don't know, there was a sort of distance between the festival and the druids. But the thing about celebrating the solstice is that it's not necessarily convenient. You celebrate the solstice when the solstice happens. You don't just do it, I don't know, sunrise on a Saturday, sunrise on a whatever, on maybe even on the nearest weekend. I mean, I think you're able to choose the day, but it can happen at some very inconvenient times. So, for example, 9:25 a.m. on a Sunday, if you are in London, is a wonderfully convenient time to celebrate the solstice. You do not have to get up in the middle of the night. It's just straightforward. So it's not such a pain to get up at 9:25. Now, if you are in California, by contrast, the solstice is at 1:24, 1:25 in the morning. Now, that is not so convenient, is it? It really is the middle of the night, and so if you want to celebrate solstice and you want to do it properly and you're in California, you've got to make sure you're up at 1:24, 1:25. If you're in New York, it's happening at 4:25, or Chicago is 3:25 in the morning. So if you want to celebrate it, you've got to do it properly. Not some sort of general moment, the dawn on a Sunday or whatever. It does happen at a precise moment. But that precise moment, why is it important? Well, I think that the solstice is a gateway. A gateway to hell. Not necessarily. No, I'm teasing there, but it is a gateway to everything. Whatever's going on in the cosmos, something is open for a split second, and you could argue that the cosmos is imprinting itself on the Earth at the precise moment of the solstice. So you could then say that you look at what is going on from an aspect point of view. And that might tell you something, certainly about the next 3 months between now and the equinox at the end of September. So what is this chart telling us? So this is a chart set for London, what you're looking at the moment of the solstice. It's a chart that, I don't think that it's necessarily that spectacular. Mars is in the 10th house. We know that in the United Kingdom there's going to be all sorts of turmoil now that Andy Burnham has been elected to Parliament, so Keir Starmer's position is now pretty much untenable. So you can see how this is, this might affect London in different ways, because with the solstice you set this chart, you can set it for different locations, but I think it's best to just look at it from a general perspective. And I don't think anything desperately stands out about the chart. The moon is making a trine to Mars, and so with moon trine Mars at the time of the solstice, it's quite a close trine. Additionally, the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. So, I think we can perhaps be quite positive about this solstice in one sense, that, things are perhaps moving. It might be a good time for communications, for getting our message across, for publishing our message. but it's done in a way that is quite subtle, because this is Moon in Virgo, sextile Mercury in sextile Mercury in Cancer, but also Mars is involved, so it's quite strident communication. But I think that some people are able to get their message across, and if there's something we want to say, we've been meaning to say it, then maybe now is the time, because we shouldn't forget that Mercury is going to go retrograde at the end of the month, and while Mercury is still direct, now might be our chance. Now, if we want to get a more sort of in-depth idea about the solstice, we can, of course, look at the midpoint. So let's look at the 90-degree dial. See if there is anything interesting. So here's a 90-degree dial. So at the time of the solstice, obviously the sun is square 0 degrees Aries, and in a 90-degree dial, a square becomes a conjunction. And so there is the sun at the 90-degree point. And so what we're looking for is is midpoints. What are the main midpoints that the sun and the 0 degrees Aries point are on? Well, one thing we've got is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So there's Mars, there's Pluto. The Mars-Pluto midpoint is at 29 degrees 51 Pisces, so it's exactly square the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And so that's certainly one aspect of this solstice, that something has to give. Mars-Pluto, there's a lot of tension developing. A lot of pressure. Yeah, something has to give. Something has to give way, and some people may be really desperate to force things through, regardless of the cost. Now, on perhaps a more positive note, the sun is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. In fact, the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint is at 0 degrees 39 Cancer. So the sun is exactly on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. And Jupiter-Uranus, it's quite dramatic, can be violent, but Jupiter-Uranus can be about freedom, suddenly feeling that there's a sense, a great sense of relief. Remember, Reinhold Ebertin in his combination of stellar influences, he describes Jupiter-Uranus together as being the, how does he describe it? As the thank the Lord aspect. So there's been a lot of pressure, something we've been worried about, tension. Maybe it's the Iran war. Maybe it's is it over? I don't know. I'm not convinced. But there might be, at least in the short term, a feeling of relief that finally things are getting better. Things are improving. Oil prices going down or whatever. But so that's that. I'm not making any predictions about the oil price, by the way. But still, there is a sense in certain quarters of elation, of excitement here. But there's also that Mars-Pluto. We haven't entirely forgotten our agenda. At least some people haven't forgotten their agenda. So you could say that it's quite an exciting time for the world, or at least it feels like that. And this chart, I did set this chart for London, and if you set the solstice for London, this solstice is actually on the ascendant. It's fairly close to it's exactly on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. So if we go back to the chart, again, this is for London. There's the ascendant, there's the midheaven. So you can see that the sun is halfway between the two, and the sun is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, and it's on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And that may say something about the short-term atmosphere in the UK. And so what we've had, we've had this by-election Andy Burnham has won this by-election. It is generally seen likely that Andy Burnham is very soon going to be the British Prime Minister, that he's going to replace Keir Starmer. And, a lot of people are excited about it. If you are a supporter of the Labour Party, you've seen Andy Burnham win the by-election. You've seen him defeat the right in this by-election. Although there is a view about him that people didn't necessarily vote for Andy Burnham because they supported the Labour Party. They voted for Andy Burnham because they wanted to get rid of Keir Starmer. But there is that sense, perhaps, in the UK, thank the Lord, finally, Keir Starmer's going to go. Short-term, big sense of relief. And the Sun, Aries point, is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. That might be Keir Starmer really trying to hang on, but I think it's quite a powerful chart for the UK. But you have to look at midpoints, and I think this is a reminder that midpoints in astrology really are important. And in terms of other places, let's just look at Washington DC, for example. So if we set the solstice for Washington DC, we see, what do we see? Well, Uranus is quite close to the ascendant, but it's not exactly there. I mean, it's 6 degrees apart. So, you've got Venus sextile the ascendant in Washington DC. So that's not so bad. There is perhaps a feeling of relief. Feeling quite good. That's not so bad, no. But don't forget, with America, we need to be looking forward to July the 4th. And of course, on July the 4th, there's a Mars-Uranus conjunction on the day. So that 250th anniversary linked up with Mars-Uranus, that's certainly interesting. And of course, Tehran is always on our mind. So if we set the solstice for Tehran, the sun is quite close to the midheaven. The moon is quite close to the ascendant. I don't know if it's. There's nothing that necessarily grabs me as being, this is a really significant chart, something that we really need to be thinking about. I think it's a more powerful chart if we set the chart for Dubai. So of course Dubai has been really hammered by the war with Iran. Its economy has been smashed. All the influencers have left, and so the sun is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. So it may be that short term, with the sun on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, if we see Jupiter-Uranus pairing as being about sort of thank the Lord, maybe there is that kind of feeling in Dubai, if the war really is over, a sort of sense of relief that things can perhaps get back to normal, or that at least in the short term things are improving. I mean, at least that is a way in which one can look at Dubai. So maybe this is positive, this Jupiter-Uranus. And I do really thinking about it, that this is the key point. This is the key aspect. The fact that the solstice is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, and so I'm kind of inclined to go with the Ebertin view. I mean, if we look at what Reinhold Ebertin says in Combination of Stellar Influences about Jupiter-Uranus, aside from thank the Lord. I mean, I think he's going to be pretty positive about the sun on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. He says, a good intellectual grasp, an inventive mind, far-sightedness, physical agility or mobility, sudden physical happiness or birth. So yeah, he is pretty positive about it. But of course, there could be a certain valence to Jupiter-Uranus. I mean, Uranus is evolved. People want their freedom. People will expect their freedom. But freedom after a prolonged period, perhaps of repression or inhibition, and finally we get a chance. So I think there is something positive to say about this solstice. And now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of June the 20th and 21st, 2026. Aries. I sometimes get asked whether my charts or my astrology readings are Eastern or Western. Of course, I'm a Western astrologer. I mean, I have an awareness of Vedic astrology, and indeed I sometimes use Vedic astrology, but primarily I am a Western astrologer. However, from a Vedic point of view, I should point out that something is going on, and from a Vedic point of view, Mars is moving into Taurus. Now, you might think that Mars has been moving into Taurus for some time. In fact, is getting ready to move into Gemini. But from a Vedic perspective, Mars has been in Aries for some time, and is over the weekend moving into sidereal Taurus. And so you could say that Mars now has a double dose of Taurus. It's now in Taurus in the east, and it's in Taurus in the west. So if we think about what that sign means, its power could be a lot more intense right now. Of course, Taurus as a sign is seen in a different way in the east than in the west, but it might really feel that it is time to just be concentrating on one thing, and not to be frittering away your energy, moving from one thing to another thing, getting distracted. No, I think right now you're aware, Aries, that something needs to be done, and the faster you can do it, the better. But Taurus is not a particularly fast sign, and it might be the case that there are a number of reasons why things take longer than usual. Perhaps more on Saturday, even though Saturday is a changeover day, and perhaps one of the issues you're facing, aside from what sign Mars is in, is a feeling of concern that has been creeping up on you over the last couple of days. Concern, wondering whether this is the right thing to do, wondering what might go wrong, maybe picking up on other people's concern, because some people do seem to be bothered. They're wondering what is going to happen next. And normally Aries, you're able to sort of maintain your independence, but at the moment it might be quite difficult to do. At least maintaining your, how shall I put it, your psychic independence. You can just pick up those vibes, and you just know what people are thinking, what people are thinking and feeling. And this does mean perhaps that you need to make sure that you've got everything right, that everything really has been done really properly. And it's not just about what other people are doing, it's about what you're doing. And as far as how you're feeling, you perhaps don't have quite as much energy as you'd like to have. And so that is a very good reason, Aries, to just be focusing on one or two things. Because if you try to do lots of different things, give in to every pressure, then your energies could get sort of scattered left, right, and centre, and you may achieve absolutely nothing, and that is not something you want to happen. And so do take it easy. I think that really does matter. And as far as the solstice is concerned, of course, the solstice happens. It happens every year. In fact, it happens twice a year, doesn't it? You've got the solstice in June, and you've got the solstice in December. And this is a time of power for the average Aries. And with the solstice, you could say that the solstice represents the lowest point. I mean, I know from a northern hemisphere perspective, you think that the sun is above the horizon for a long time. It is, after all, the longest day over the weekend. But Aries, from your perspective, regardless of whether you're north or south of the equator, you just feel that, in a way, this might be a bit of a low point. When I say a low point, I'm not talking about a low point that is necessarily bad, or a time where there is excessive negativity. Although I think there could be some negativity and fear around today, but from now on, things arguably are getting better. Things are maybe improving, and between now and the next solstice, the solstice at the end of December, we have the sun from a perspective of your chart. I mean, you look at here is a chart with Aries on the left. You can see the sun is right at the bottom of the chart, and in 6 months' time it'll be at the top of the chart. So from now on, you're arguably gaining, you're climbing, and things might, in a very general sense, be improving. Now, I don't want to suggest that everything is negative today. I mean, negative. I don't want to suggest that. And the moon right now is at midnight. It's midnight on Sunday. The moon is in Virgo, and it's applying to a trine of Mars, and so Sunday sees an exact Moon-Mars trine, and I would have thought that Moon trine Mars could actually be quite useful. It allows you to get yourself together, and it's not, I don't think, an exciting aspect, but it allows you to think about the things that are important. So if you are of the view that something has been difficult, something has been hard work, it might be with this Moon trine Mars that you finally get some traction. You finally have an opportunity to get things moving, but in quite a slow and methodical way. Now, right at the end of a weekend, we have what do we have? We have the moon moving into Libra. Right at the end. London time, I think that's 5 to 10 in the evening on Sunday. It would be earlier on Sunday if you're in the Americas. And so when the moon moves into Libra, things do change, and I think that your priorities change. Moon moving into Libra, well, for one thing, it's out of Virgo, and perhaps when the moon moves out of Virgo, you're perhaps feeling a little bit better. You're not so worried about the material side of things, and you can perhaps look beyond annoying details. And also with the moon in Libra, we're thinking perhaps about relationships and what impact certain other people have on you. And this then says something about the beginning of the week and how next week is going to unfold. Now, the moon, when it moves into Libra, it does make a square to the sun. So in other words, that is a first quarter moon. So you've got the sun in Cancer, making the sun in Cancer will be making a square to the moon in Libra, and I think you might feel that first quarter moon because it is a cardinal first quarter moon, and you feel a change. You perhaps feel the change of perhaps having to deal with certain other people, but at some level you don't necessarily want to, because as the sun moves into Cancer, as we get the solstice, that creates a change, because the sun has been in Gemini and now it's in Cancer, Aries. You might feel that you're somewhat rooted to the spot almost. I mean, obviously the sun moves into Cancer the same time of year, every year, but it can be a time when many Arians want a change of gear. Yes, in a broad and general sense, the sun moving into Cancer might be a bit of a low point, and from now on things are on the up. But that immediate changeover just might be a time when you want to retreat, and you want to make sure that you are in control. And then moon square the sun. I mean, moon square the sun could be an irritant, someone who perhaps has to be dealt with, but you don't really want to deal with them. As an Aries, you can be quite independent, and you want to do things your way. But sometimes there are things that really can't be avoided, and it might just be a question of obligation. And if we're talking about obligation from a heliocentric perspective, just a reminder of the heliocentric chart. Here it is. Sort of heliocentrically. This is the heliocentric chart. Let me just really make it the heliocentric chart. Yeah, that is the heliocentric chart. So, heliocentrically there is a change, but heliocentrically Mars is still quite close to Chiron. It might not seem like it because Mars has just changed sign, but has just changed sign. But when you've got Mars close to Chiron, as it is heliocentrically, there is a feeling of obligation that something is wrong, and you want to address it, and you want to perhaps put it right. And there might be that feeling, and maybe when you're with other people, that obligation can't entirely be suppressed. So if you do feel a sense of obligation, don't be surprised, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you immediately have to do anything about it, because I think fundamentally, Aries, I think it's important to look after yourself, but still, as you move into next week with the moon moving into Libra, it does seem that there are certain people who can't entirely be avoided. Taurus. So you are aware of a number of changes. When I did the video sort of yesterday for Friday, I talked about the fact that Chiron has just gone into Taurus. I'm not saying that you're going to immediately feel Chiron in Taurus. I mean, Chiron is it's a very slow moving body, and it's a very small body. It's just a comet, really. And I don't think if one's doing charts, if one's doing astrology, one necessarily has to pay attention to Chiron. I mean, I've only really been bothering with Chiron in the last couple of years, and I don't think it's necessarily obligatory to use Chiron, but it's just that sort of added thing that is perhaps worth looking at. And now that Chiron has moved into Taurus, you are feeling that maybe there's just something you need to pay attention to, that perhaps in the past you had ignored. And it's not just Chiron in Taurus. It's not just about wounds and the wounded healer. It's also about what you feel you need to do. And sometimes you feel an urge to do something which you kind of know isn't in your best interests, but you might nonetheless feel that you have to go through with it. I mean, you have to perhaps stand up for yourself, perhaps even also stand up for other people. And additionally, we have got Mars moving into your sign, both zodiacs. So I know Mars has been moving through Taurus for some time. In fact, Mars is getting ready to move into Gemini. But if you're into Vedic astrology, then Mars moves into Taurus this weekend. So you could say that Mars is in Taurus now in both zodiacs. And so, Mars is a planet of assertion. And with Mars kind of being a bit of a double Taurus, then this might be a time where you feel that you really have to apply yourself, that something needs to be done, that you need to see things through. And if you do nothing, then Taurus, there might be a feeling of tension, just something not entirely right, that something has to give. I mean, I think you're going to feel that tension anyway. You're picking up on, something going on out there. No one is entirely 100% relaxed, and you just feel that something has to give. If you do nothing, then the tension starts to rise. You can feel the constriction. On the other hand, if you were to act, what might go wrong? Well, things could in theory go wrong, but I think there is a place for a degree of fearlessness. I mean, not crazy fearlessness. I mean, don't do anything, really, really mad, particularly on a physical level. I mean, after all, Mars in Taurus, you could argue that that might make you more accident prone than usual. But I don't want you to get worried about nothing, and always think about what you want to do. It is the weekend. The moon is in Virgo. The moon is in an earth sign. In other words, it's in a sign which is friendly to the average Taurus. And I think that as the weekend progresses, I think you are going to feel more and more energy, because what's happening is that the moon is applying to a trine of Mars, and this moon trine Mars for you, Taurus, looks really good. It really allows you to not just be assertive, but to also be really creative. And you can do things properly, but you can also do a really good job, and most importantly, you can enjoy yourself. And the moon, in fact, the moon doesn't just make a trine to Mars. It also makes a sextile to Jupiter. In fact, it makes a sextile to Mercury. So the moon is doing some great stuff here, and this really is a time when you can assert yourself, be yourself, and really communicate very effectively. Especially on Sunday. I think overall, Sunday is a better day than Saturday. And of course, we've also got the solstice. Of course, in the northern hemisphere, it's the longest day, and the southern hemisphere, of course, it's the shortest day. But whichever way you look at it, it's the solstice. And the solstice, the sun moves out of Gemini, moves into Cancer. That means you've got 3 planets in Cancer, and the sign Cancer is, I would have said overall, is a a Taurus-friendly sign. I mean, I know that the sun moves into Cancer at roughly the same time of year, every year, but with Mercury and Jupiter also in Cancer, I think that this is a time when Taurians, I think, can be more forthcoming, more sociable. You can be more open about what's on your mind, and you don't have to be tied to any one person, any one place, any one group. So if you want some variety over the weekend, especially on Sunday, then I think you really should be able to find it. So in general, I think that the weekend does get better as it goes along, though right at the end of the weekend or into Monday, the moon does move into Libra, and that does create a change of pace. And with the moon moving into Libra, it's perhaps not enough just to be yourself, to do things you enjoy. You have to perhaps be a little more careful, making sure that everything is done right. Okay, you might have started things and it might have been fun to start things, but at a certain stage you have to bring them under control. And if you want to continue with something, it perhaps requires more discipline. But that's something you can by and large worry about on Monday and at the beginning of the new week. Gemini, you're feeling a bit pressurized. It's nothing too serious, but you feel that things are not just going to happen all by themselves, and that if you want change, you're going to have to perhaps make some effort to really force it through. And the question is, are you in the mood to do that? I mean, do you have the capacity? One thing that is happening right now, Gemini, is that, several things are happening. Well, in a broad sense, Mercury, your ruler, is starting to slow down. It's slowly getting ready to go retrograde. And as Mercury slows down, you just might feel that maybe you haven't got as much energy as you thought you had. And so it's important that you don't take on too much. And if there is something that you want to do, then make sure you focus on it. Because if you try and do several things at once, it might just be that you'll end up sort of doing absolutely nothing. So it very much is important that you decide what matters, and you are quite disciplined about it. And of course, it's not just the fact that Mercury is slowing down; it's also the fact that the Sun is leaving your sign. Yes, it is. I mean, you've had the Sun in Gemini for the last month. I mean, nothing lasts forever. It's moving into Cancer. The Gemini season is coming to a close. Although you're always going to have Uranus in Gemini. Don't worry, Uranus is there rooting for you. Gemini hasn't gone away entirely, but it's sort of going to be remaining at quite a collective level with that Uranus in Gemini. So Sun moving out of Gemini, just might feel that perhaps you're losing some of your power. Although I wouldn't necessarily exaggerate that worry. One thing the Sun is doing on Saturday is it is making a biquintile to Pluto. So when we think about a biquintile, a biquintile is an 144 degree aspect. And what does 144 mean? Well, 144 is 144 degrees. That is 2/5. Yeah, it's 2/5 of a circle, and it's very much to do with the number 5, and it is what you are, what you're trying to create. And with Sun by quintile Pluto, there might be a certain urgency on your part, particularly at the beginning of the weekend. You might feel that you have to do something. You have to apply yourself. You have to assert yourself. You have to create change. This is what I was saying right at the beginning of this piece on Gemini, that you know, or you feel that change is required, but at the same time you're just aware of everything that might be holding you back. And rather than panic, feel that you must force something through now this minute. Perhaps you should start to get into the energy of Sun by quintile Pluto. It starts with having an idea, having a belief, not just a belief, in fact, it goes beyond belief. It moves from belief to actually will. It is your will for something to happen, and you can really concentrate on something, and in a methodical way put theory into practice, especially on Saturday. But it is rather contrived. It is through your own efforts, and if you can do this, I do think that you can get real results. But with the Sun moving out of Gemini into Cancer, it does it does change things. Does change the emphasis. And remember, Mercury is in Cancer. With Mercury about to go retrograde, Mercury stays in Cancer for quite a long time. It will be in Cancer, and off the top of my head, I think doesn't Mercury stay in Cancer until April the 10th? So that is quite a long time for Mercury, because Mercury, you normally associate Mercury as being quite a fast mover, and this might be a time when many Geminis are tied up with money. Money is something that can't always be avoided. I mean, seasonally, this might always happen when the sun is moving through Cancer at this time of year. But you've also got Jupiter in Cancer, and you've also got Mercury in Cancer, and with Jupiter in Cancer, well, for the moment Jupiter is in Cancer. In less than a couple of weeks, Jupiter leaves Cancer, and I think that while Jupiter has been moving through Cancer, over the last year and more, money has been, I think, a challenge. I mean, it's been an area of potentially of growth, but also of worry for some Geminis. And now that the Sun is in the same sign as Gemini, and Mercury is the Sun is in the same sign as Jupiter, Mercury about to go retrograde. I think from now on, the financial side of things could be becoming really quite important, something that you really need to be thinking about. But I'm not saying it's bad. It may be that you have an opportunity really to get things together and to understand what exactly it is that Jupiter is telling you to do or advising you to do. Of course, Jupiter is not some external body. I mean, okay, it is an external body, but perhaps you should see Jupiter as being part of who you are. There's that side to you that is thinking about the bigger picture. Wants the best for you, and it would be great if you could sort out the financial side of things. If you could put some financial concern, or even a financial misunderstanding, if you could put it to rest. And as we move into Sunday, I mean, Sunday, sees the sun in Cancer. I mean, the sun moves into Cancer, I think, at 9:25 in the morning London time. So that would be very early on Sunday if you're in the Americas. And so the sun in Cancer, you can feel the change. And it's not just about money, it's also about perhaps wanting to slow things down, and it might actually be quite a good thing to slow things down. I mean, the moon is making sextiles to Mercury and Jupiter, and I think those sextiles to Mercury and Jupiter really could work for you. You might just see that actually the universe is on your side, and maybe other people are on your side as well, because Mercury is moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter. I mean, it appears to be moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter. I mean, Mercury and Jupiter, only 5 degrees apart, so I think Jupiter is a planet of good luck. Mercury moving towards it. I mean, you could say that is financial good luck, and I'm not saying that Sunday's going to see anything specifically good happening in a financial sense, or indeed in any other sense, but the fact that the moon makes a sextile to Mercury and a sextile to Jupiter does suggest that the moon is kind of bringing Mercury and Jupiter together. I mean, the moon is process in a chart, and it's it represents the lines of communication. It allows things to come together, and if you are concerned about money or something material, it perhaps is the case that the solution is not out there on the other side of the world, but the solution is actually at home. It's in your immediate sphere. Perhaps you could argue that the solution to any financial concern you might have is almost in your hands, but you have to make sure that you look down, you can see that it is in your hands or is by your side. You don't have to move, you just have to perhaps reach, but that means you have to open your eyes and look in the right place. Cancer. Well, Cancer, the Cancer season is with us. It is the weekend of the solstice. In the northern hemisphere, that is the summer solstice, and in theory, at least, for the average Cancer, this is a time of power over the next month. The sun is moving through your sign. There may be things that you have been holding back on, and now it's time to be moving forward. It's not a time for retreat, really. Far from it. So if you have been holding back, then perhaps it's time to put things into action. Although, don't forget that on Saturday the sun is still in Gemini. It's only on Sunday that the sun makes that sign change. But even before the sun is in Cancer, you've got the moon in Virgo, and the moon in Virgo, that is that's a pretty good sign for the moon to be in. I mean, the moon is in the third house from Cancer. Cancer house number 1, Leo house number 2, Virgo house number 3, and the moon joys in Virgo. So it is a time when you're feeling pretty good about yourself, and the moon, while it's moving through Virgo, it applies to it makes a sextile to Mars. It makes it makes a sextile. What does it do? It makes a sextile to Mercury. It makes a trine to Mars. It makes a sextile to Jupiter. So that is that's all pretty positive. And so Cancer, really have a good weekend. Especially on Sunday. I mean, I think Sunday could be a really good day, really active day. On Saturday, maybe not quite so much. In fact, astrologically, there's not a huge amount going on Saturday. I mean, that doesn't mean to say nothing's going to be going on in the world on Saturday, but on a sort of a personal level, at the level of the individual, I mean, Saturday doesn't seem to be a huge amount to report. But still, the moon is in Virgo throughout the weekend, and the moon, even on Saturday, is applying to the sextile, to a sextile of Mercury, and so it does mean that you're feeling, I think, increasingly good about yourself, and don't forget, Cancer, that Jupiter remains in your sign. Okay, it's getting closer and closer to leaving the sign, but it's still there, and the moon picks up on it. In fact, right now we have a conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter, and this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is not exact. It's 4 or 5 degrees apart, and this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction actually never happens. I mean, it certainly doesn't happen in Cancer. I mean, when Mercury does make a conjunction to Jupiter, that conjunction will be when Jupiter is in Leo, and it won't take place until sort of later in the northern hemisphere summer. But the moon is bringing the conjunction together, because the moon makes a sextile to Mercury, then it makes a trine to Jupiter, and it also sorry, let me make that clear. Moon makes a sextile to Mercury, then it makes a sextile to Jupiter, and between those two sextiles, it makes a trine to Mars, and so I think that Sunday is a Mercury-Jupiter day, Mercury-Jupiter in your own sign, and that might be about understanding. When you think about the role of Mercury in a horoscope, and I've been thinking quite a lot about Mercury. Mercury is quite a difficult planet to understand in a way, because Mercury, kind of like the moon, is a planet that brings things together, that sends messages, allows for a line of communication, but it also is quite changeable, and it kind of takes on the quality of its environment, and as the environment changes, so does Mercury change, and so it does still facilitate communication, and I think it facilitates your understanding of what Jupiter in Cancer is all about. We have all sorts of ideas about what Jupiter in Cancer means for the average Cancerian, and this is something that's always talked about on the comments of this channel. Whether or not Jupiter in Cancer is working, and I know that not everyone is happy with the way Jupiter in Cancer has been working, but right now you could argue that Jupiter in Cancer is prominent because the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter, because Mercury is starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and of course with Jupiter in Cancer, this is a time of good fortune, at least on paper, and I think that there is certainly something you can do or discuss on Sunday which can boost your luck. So I think that is something to look forward to, and also of course we've got the solstice with the sun moving into your sign. It is it's perhaps the beginning of your time of year when maybe finally you can take full advantage of Jupiter in your sign. Now, one thing we do have at the end of the weekend is a first quarter moon, and I think this first quarter moon is potentially quite important, particularly for Cancerians. So I've talked about the moon being in Virgo, but right at the end of a weekend, the moon changes sign. It moves out of Virgo and into Libra. Let me just make sure I've got the time of this sign change right. So the moon Yeah, the moon changes sign, moves out of Virgo into Libra at 21:55 on Sunday evening. So that is London time at 5 to 10 in the evening. So that will be in the afternoon if you're in the Americas. Okay, not until tomorrow if you're in Australia or Asia, or most of Asia. So with the moon with the moon moving into Libra, right at the end of the weekend, I don't think it's really something you need to think about in a way this weekend. I mean, it's more about Monday, but perhaps you need to get ready for that sign change. So when the moon moves into Libra, it makes a square to the sun in Cancer, and although this is a time for Cancerians to really move forward with things, right at the end of a weekend and into the beginning of next week, as the moon moves into Libra, it just might be temporarily a time where you just need to kind of stop what you're doing or just re-evaluate it, because this sign change, it coincides with the first quarter moon. So you've got the sun in Cancer square the moon in Libra. So over the course of maybe Monday, you might just feel that you're at cross purposes. That part of you would really like to move forward and take new initiatives, but then the moon in Libra is saying, well, maybe there's something else you need to consider. For example, relating to your sense of belonging. Are you really that comfortable? Have you got everything sorted out? Are you ready to step outwards into a brave but interesting new world? And maybe you want to pause just for a moment, before you really fully take the initiative. But I mean, I think it is quite exceptional that we have this first quarter moon just after the precise moment of the solstice, and so you might just feel that you kind of know you want to make things happen, you want to take the initiative, but there's just something holding you back, something saying this is not quite the right moment. But I think that's something you need to be thinking about at the beginning of the next week, and I wouldn't worry about it too much. Leo, you want things to happen. I mean, I think you have wanted things to happen, for some time. And, recently you've had, quite a lot of ideas, a lot of sort of interesting things going on. And you perhaps feel that you need to force a pace. And it might almost seem to be a kind of a zero-sum situation. If you don't take the initiative, then, you might be sort of rolled over. It's kind of like that. So you have to kind of stand up for something that really does matter, and if something is important to you, then you want to give it everything you've got. You really want to force it through, and the question is this something you're going to be able to do? So just because you feel urgency, necessity, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to just do it straight away, and really move forward. But I think certainly the beginning of a weekend, there just might be a sense of pressure. I mean, maybe it's because the sun is about to change sign. You've had the sun in Gemini, and you'd be getting used to the sun in Gemini, and then you're wondering about what happens when the sun moves into Cancer. Well, yeah, there is a change, and it might feel that if you don't do it now, when you next going to have an opportunity to do it. And so with the sun making a biquintile to Pluto on Saturday, so that means that the sun and Pluto are 144 degrees apart, which is 2/5 of the circle. So the sun, your ruler, making that aspect to Pluto, and you think about a biquintile. It's a very 5 aspect. So what is the nature of 5? 5 is a man-made number, human-made number. It's what you are trying to create. It's not a particularly natural number. And you have your idea, you have your will, and now you have to put the effort into making it happen, and it's all down to you. But if you're clear and you're focused, then on Saturday you have a possibility here of maybe turning what appears to be nothing into something, creating effects out of nothing. So if Saturday seems to be an empty day, then it doesn't have to stay empty. I think that you really can have an impact if you want to have an impact. But I think that this Sun biquintile Pluto is quite a voluntary aspect. It's not an aspect that is going to be knocking on your door. It's going to be sort of demanding immediate attention. I don't think it's an aspect that is going to manifest through external events. It's really up to you how you put things into action. Now, you could say that the main thing going on, over the weekend is the sun changing sign, and every time we have the sun changing sign, that affects you, because the sun is your ruler, and so on paper at least, sun moving through Cancer for the next month is a time when the average Leo is maybe not feeling particularly active. You might be feeling that you're holding something back, that you don't want to be in the thick of things. And okay, you might want to be, perhaps, but it doesn't feel right. And if that's the way you feel, I think that's absolutely fine. And it might mean, with the sun moving through Cancer, that there's just less pressure. And if you want to retreat, if you want to sort of withdraw to some extent into your private world, then I think with sun moving through Cancer, you can. But don't forget that Jupiter is getting ready to move into Leo, moving into your sign. That happens very soon at the end of the month, and so you could say that the sun moving through Cancer, it gives you perhaps a chance to prepare, and also to just think about the last year and what the last year was all about. Last year might have been a time for some Leos where you weren't fully yourself. There were things that you had to maybe keep secret, or you just felt that the opportunity didn't exist. But it is changing, and so perhaps it's a time, Leo, when you can enjoy reflecting, because this time isn't going to last forever. Now, when the sun moves into Cancer, it makes a sextile to Chiron, because Chiron is now in Taurus. And I think that this sun sextile Chiron does matter to you. It's not necessarily a case that you have to do anything with sun sextile Chiron, but I think it certainly makes you aware of things. And I think it does actually make you aware of how different you are. It's because Chiron, it's not just about wounds, the wounded healer. It's also the maverick. It's about the capacity for doing things differently, the capacity for thinking outside the box. And you perhaps realize with sun sextile Chiron that you have quite a unique perspective. And maybe this connects with the sun moving into Cancer as well, because I mentioned or suggested that the sun moving into Cancer for you, Leo, might be a time where you want to withdraw, where you want to sort of hold back. And that might be because you just don't know how the world is going to handle you? Are people going to be prepared to listen to you? I mean, of course they're prepared to listen to you. You've got something really interesting to contribute. And when Jupiter moves into Leo, in a week or two, in less than a fortnight's time, you'll have that chance. And I think that the Sun sextile Chiron just does allow you to tune into what makes you different. And, it's not just about being different for the sake of it. It might be something, quite unique, a unique perspective. It might also be an awareness that you want to do something that is moral or ethical. You may have thoughts, for example, about your career. If you have a job, I know it's a weekend, maybe you're not working over the weekend, but if you're just having a break over the weekend, then you can sort of think things through and realize that maybe you haven't got things exactly right, and you need to do things in a way that is more in accord with who you are and your fundamental individuality. And don't neglect your individuality. You're a Leo anyway, so Leos always should think about how they are special, always. And I think the Sun sextile Chiron may really emphasize this, but it's nothing egotistical. It's not like you wanting attention just for the sake of it. Sun sextile Chiron can have a humanitarian edge to it. Perhaps you are aware of suffering in the world, or suffering in your particular part of the world, and with Sun sextile Chiron you want to do something about it, and because it's a sextile, you actually have the capacity to do something about it. So if you feel that something is wrong, that something could be done better with Sun sextile Chiron, then I think it's very likely that you will have a chance to act, and there may be a feeling of obligation here. Virgo. The moon is moving through Virgo pretty much the whole of the weekend. Okay, the moon does move into Libra, right at the end of the weekend. I think it moves into Libra at 5 to 10 on Sunday evening, which would be 5 to 5 on Sunday afternoon if you're in New York, or a bit earlier in the afternoon if you're in California. But overall, it's a moon in Libra weekend, and a moon in Virgo weekend. So that's good for you, because you are a Virgo, obviously, and you feel quite good about yourself. And I think that you have plenty of opportunities to do things, that you want to do. And I think it would be a shame if you would have a boring weekend. There's no need to have a boring weekend, because there is, I think, quite a lot going on, especially on Sunday. I mean, definitely Sunday is a more active day than Saturday, and the reason being is it's because of aspects. There is the aspect side of things. So the moon in Virgo makes a sextile to Mercury. Mercury is, of course, your ruler. It makes a trine to Mars, and it makes a sextile to Jupiter. So, in other words, it's picking up on a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. Mercury and Jupiter are both in Cancer. So through your own actions, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to make a real effort to take action. Just through your own actions, you can definitely make things happen. From a social perspective, I think it can be quite a good weekend. So if you want to meet people, talk to people, perhaps people you've never talked to before, now might be your chance. If you have opportunities to go to parties, other gatherings, then it's probably a good idea. Okay. On Saturday, things might seem a bit slow, but I think sort of late on Saturday, I think the pace does pick up. So really, try to have a busy weekend, and perhaps also try to see things through. With the moon making sextiles to Mercury and Jupiter, that is kind of bringing Mercury and Jupiter together. And so, Jupiter is a fortunate planet, and so obviously Mercury conjunct Jupiter really makes things better for yourself, and it gives you good fortune. But this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction on its own doesn't happen. I mean, they look as if they're close, Mercury and Jupiter. They're moving, in theory, towards each other, but Mercury is slowing down. Mercury is about to go retrograde. So, in fact, the exact conjunction doesn't happen, but the moon brings them together. And so, with the moon bringing Mercury and Jupiter together, and the moon in Virgo, that suggests your actions can make all the difference. And I don't think you have to do very much. It just means that you're just prepared to take the initiative. And to begin with, right at the beginning of a weekend, you might think you're not accomplishing much, but if you keep working away, keep suggesting, keep trying to put yourself in the center of things, then it won't be long, Virgo, before you start to have a real and very constructive influence. And also with Moon trine Mars, that's a very energetic aspect. It does allow you to get things together. It allows you to think about new things. It allows you to give yourself a broader perspective. So you don't have to be tied to any form of sort of obligation. Not at all. You should do things because you want to do them, not because anyone expects you to do it. So you can act off your own bat, and if you want to be energetic and forward thinking and perhaps go somewhere new and interesting, then I really think you can. So overall, I'm pretty optimistic about the weekend. And also, of course, it is the solstice, when the sun moves out of Gemini and into Cancer. Now, the sun moving into Cancer, well, I mean, it does happen every year at this time of year. So it's not exactly a unique event, but maybe when the sun moves out of Gemini, it removes a bit of pressure from you. With the sun in Gemini, particularly as Uranus is in Gemini as well, some Virgos might just feel that there is a pressure to perhaps be successful, to really make their mark on the world. I mean, it's not an entirely comfortable pressure. It's just something you have to do. And then when the sun moves into Cancer, some of that pressure starts to ease. You perhaps realize there isn't that kind of hurry, that kind of panic, and you can sort of get a broader perspective and think not just about the short term, but think about what you want to do with your life. It's that kind of thing, and so. Don't drive yourself crazy. Don't feel that things have to be done, at a particular time. Not necessarily. Maybe when the sun moves out of Gemini into Cancer, you might realize that something that you thought you had to do right now can be postponed. Perhaps can be postponed even a couple of months. You can perhaps wait until the sun moves into Virgo at the end of August, and I'll talk about that when it happens. Libra. We have the solstice. I mean, that arguably is the main event of the weekend, when the sun moves out of Gemini into Cancer. And so when the sun moves into Cancer, that means we got three planets in Cancer: the Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter. Of course, Jupiter's not going to stay in Cancer for much longer. In a week or two's time, it will move into Leo. And I think that with the solstice, this might create, a bit of pressure, but probably the kind of pressure which may work in your favour. Perhaps something you need. Sometimes Librans can take an overly relaxed approach. You don't want to force the pace. You don't want to upset anyone. There's always this feeling of balance, and you want to make sure that everything really is in balance, and that's the way it is. And but now that the sun is in Cancer, you kind of feel that something maybe needs to happen. That things won't necessarily wait forever. Now, of course, the sun moves into Cancer every year, so that might sound like not being a particularly big deal, but this time round Jupiter is in Cancer as well, and Jupiter's not here. As I said, Jupiter's getting ready to move into Leo, but from a Libran perspective, Jupiter in Cancer can be about success, doing something really, really outstanding. And I don't know what you've been thinking in terms of this Jupiter in Cancer, because Jupiter has been in Cancer for the last year. So if you're working, you have a career, or even if you just have an aim, a target, it might seem that something needs to happen, and you perhaps can't wait forever. And so this sign change, this solstice, could for you be quite motivating, and you might be able to tune into a sort of a new power, because when the sun moves into Cancer, it straight away makes a sextile to Chiron, and so Chiron has just moved into Taurus, and Chiron in Taurus for you, Libra, might represent something that you have kept secret, that you haven't talked about, and it might be something that you don't fully want to reveal. But it's a kind of an interesting perspective. It's a perspective that might also be disturbing, because Chiron can disturb. That's part of Chiron's nature, I think. And so with Sun sextile Chiron on Sunday, as you get the solstice, then you think that you have a different perspective, and it's maybe a unique perspective. It's a perspective that not everyone is going to appreciate, but it is something you can very much move forward with, and so that might be how you understand a Sun sextile Chiron. But it is a time now to be moving forward, to be thinking about what your priorities are. And will it be easy? Not entirely easy, because I think that many Librans are feeling a certain tension. You know that there are things you really want to do, you'd like to really get on with it, but you're also aware of all the things that are holding you back. And as far as you're concerned, the transition might actually have to be violent. I mean, not literally violent, but you have to put a lot of effort into something. Maybe it feels like something has to be broken, has to be smashed, because things aren't just going to naturally and organically change, and things aren't just naturally going to move in your way. You are going to have to put in, not just effort, but maybe some kind of supreme effort. At least that's what you might be telling yourself. But I don't think it's necessarily quite as dramatic about it. Now, the sun moving into Cancer, the solstice is certainly important, but there is another thing going on which coincides with the solstice. And what it is the first quarter moon. So the moon is moving through Virgo all weekend, and at least most of the weekend. All the weekend, for example, if you're in Asia or Australia. But it does move into your sign right at the end, at 5 to 10 in the evening on Sunday London time, Sunday afternoon if you're in the Americas. And when that sign change happens, it's a first quarter moon. The sun and the moon are exactly square one another. And so you've got sun in Cancer, square moon in Libra, and it's right at the beginning of the signs. It's close to the cardinal points. And I think that this first quarter moon really does matter to you. I mean, in fact, here's a chart of the first quarter moon. There you can see it happening at. There it is. In fact, this for some reason this first quarter moon, it says it's at 10:55. Have I got that right? Anyway, that's the first quarter moon happening on Sunday evening, and so right at the end of a weekend, you've got the first quarter moon, and it happens just after the moon has moved into Libra. Now maybe this first quarter moon is more about Monday rather than Sunday, but it's kind of marks the end of a weekend. It tells you something about the new week, and it is dynamic, and it relates to perhaps how you want to think about the new week. And it's a time when you actually have to take action. I think you really do feel that way, and I've already said, at the beginning of this interpretation for Libra, that you might be feeling restless. You feel that something does need to happen, and so if you have wanted to do something, you've wanted to unfurl your ambitions, make a splash, whatever it is, perhaps the time has arrived. So maybe at the end of the weekend, as you move into Monday, be prepared for a change, and be prepared to really start to assert yourself. And certainly if you're in the Americas, I think you start to feel that on Sunday afternoon. And so if you are an American Libra, it might be that on Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening you really feel that you need a change of pace, that you need to start to really up the pace, even though it might seem to be a quiet weekend, but there are things to think about, and perhaps things to plan. Scorpio. Mars is, of course, your ruler, and when I do these horoscopes, I look at things from a Western perspective. I am a Western astrologer. Sometimes people ask, do I look at things from the East or the West? Well, no, I'm a Western astrologer, primarily. That doesn't mean to say that I never look at Vedic astrology. When I do someone's horoscope, I will always look at someone's chart from a Vedic perspective as well as a Western perspective. But I don't regard myself as an expert by any means on Vedic astrology. But one thing that cannot be avoided is the fact that Mars is moving into sidereal Taurus. So if you are a Vedic astrologer, you will notice, you may regard it as being really important, that Mars is changing sign over the weekend. It's moving into Taurus. Of course, from a Western perspective, Mars has been in Taurus for ages, and is in fact getting ready to move into Gemini. So you could then say that Mars is in Taurus in both zodiacs, both the Eastern and the Western zodiac. And so Scorpio, you might feel that you do become more focused. That there's something that you really want to concentrate on. Maybe recently you've been a little bit distracted. There've been a couple of things to concentrate on, but now it seems to be quite single pointed, and that kind of links with what we know about the average Scorpio. I mean, Scorpio is quite an intense sign. Scorpio is regarded as a fixed sign because it doesn't get distracted. It knows what is important, and it can really give something its best once it decides to focus. So yeah, a time for focus, and I think that Mars moving into Taurus, isn't such a bad thing sidereally, because if you think about, from a Western perspective, it's said that Mars is in its detriment in Taurus. It somehow loses points because it's Mars is in its, when Scorpio is Mars rules Scorpio, so in Taurus it's kind of in its detriment, it's not so strong. In Vedic astrology, I don't think you really have a concept of detriment. You have a concept of fall, but not with detriment. So I don't think there's anything intrinsically difficult about Mars being in Taurus from a Vedic perspective. But it does make you, I think, more intense, and perhaps it makes you all the more keen to overcome whatever obstacles might be in front of you. And some Scorpios right now are feeling a little bit negative. Yeah, sure, you have your ambitions, but you also have quite a few worries. I should make it clear that I'm not trying to create worries out of nothing. I'm not trying to create self-fulfilling prophecies. That's not what I want to do. But some Scorpios may feel that there are just many reasons why they can't achieve everything they would like to achieve. It just seems difficult. There's perhaps a lot of opposition. And even a lot of fear. It may not be your fear, it may be other people's fear, and this just might be something that is bothering you. But I should emphasize that it's largely in your imagination. It doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean it's not of importance if it's not in your imagination, but I think you come up with a lot of stories why you can't do something, why you have to restrict yourself, and so perhaps Scorpio, it's a time when you have to sort of identify where the obstacles lie, and then do what is necessary to get through. And maybe fear is just something you have to get through. Of course, fear has its role. If fear is there to protect you from doing something disastrous, but I don't think we're talking about that. We're talking about just something you're holding back on, something you feel you shouldn't be doing or can't be doing. But I think you can get over it. And one thing that is going on over the weekend, there are a couple of things happening, but we do have the solstice. The solstice with the sun moving out of Gemini and into Cancer, and that takes place I think at 9:25 a.m. London time on Sunday. And so with the sun moving into Cancer, all things being equal, that makes things easier for you. Sun in Gemini, it's kind of a difficult place for the sun. Gemini and Scorpio are two signs that don't always get on. Not necessarily on an interpersonal level, but just if you think about the broad compatibility of the signs, air sign, water sign, mutable sign, fixed sign, there is a certain tension between Sun and Gemini. And so when a sun moves into Cancer, the sun moves into a water sign, straight away just things feel better. And I've just talked about fear, but the sun is going to stay in Cancer for the next month, and broadly speaking, while the sun moves through Cancer, things are going to feel better, and you're going to feel sort of more optimistic, and you're going to become aware that there are genuine possibilities out there, that you're not tied to a particular course of action. And if you want variety, you can have variety, and if you want to look at things from a new perspective, that is certainly possible. And while the sun moves through Cancer on Saturday, we've got the moon in Virgo, and moon moving through Virgo, from your perspective, Scorpio, it's quite a sociable place. It is actually quite an optimistic place. So I think that in terms of the fear levels and restriction levels, I think that Saturday may not be a great day, but as you move into Sunday, I think you're feeling better about yourself, and more things become possible. And the moon in Virgo, it makes a trine to Mars. It makes a trine to Mars, which is of course your ruler, and it might be that things start to move. Things perhaps start to move, facilitated by other people. Maybe other people, the people around you, become more sympathetic, and if you want to have an impact, I think that you can have an impact. And there's a lot to say. The moon is making a sextile to Mercury. It's making a sextile to Jupiter. So there are a lot of possibilities out there. And so, I don't think you need regard yourself as being alone, you battling the world, or you feeling that other people's priorities and your priorities are different. They're not necessarily different. They may just have to be negotiated. And if you're afraid of someone else's response, you might have something you'd like to do, but you may think you can't do it because someone else is going to veto it. Well, perhaps you should need to find out what another person is thinking and feeling. And I think that on Sunday, things are moving, things are happening. And additionally on Sunday, the sun is making a sextile to Chiron, and of course Chiron has just moved into Taurus, which is your opposite sign. And it could be with Sun sextile Chiron, you have a new awareness of another person's view. And I've talked about your fears and concerns, but perhaps Sun sextile Chiron allows you to tune into another person's fears and concerns. It might even be the case that you become aware of how a projection is working. So perhaps if you have felt nervous about something, particularly on Saturday, the reason for that nervousness is nothing intrinsic to you. It just might have been that you were picking up on someone else's energy. And, by the end of the weekend, you might have a greater awareness of where that energy is coming from, and also how to deal with it, how perhaps to put someone's mind to rest. And I think, in the end, believe it or not, Scorpio, you can be quite a reassuring influence. But at the same time, you can also very much look after your own interests. Sagittarius. It's the solstice over the weekend. Solstice happens at 9:25 on Sunday morning, London time, which is it's going to be very early on Sunday if you're in the Americas. And as far as the solstice is concerned, we could say the sun is moving into Cancer. We could also say that the sun is leaving Gemini. I know it's the same thing, but we're looking at what is no longer there. So you've had the sun in Gemini for the last month. The sun has been moving through your opposite sign, for better or for worse. And with the sun moving through Gemini, it of course affects you at the same time every year. The sun always moves through Gemini. Roughly the same time of year, and so it can be a time of year when many Sagittarians are thinking about the other, relating to the other. Of course, it might mean nothing. There is a view, by the way. I know we talk about the sun, but there is a view that the sun doesn't work astrologically. If you look at the research of Michel Gauguin, he found that only 5 planets worked, and those planets were Moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. He found no evidence that Sun and Mercury worked astrologically. I mean, I thought I'd just tell you that. Let's not necessarily exaggerate what the influence of Sun in Gemini has been like. But all things being equal, while the Sun was in Gemini, it perhaps was a time when there were people that had to be dealt with. You were perhaps more aware of the influence that other people had on you, and now that the Sun is moving into Cancer, perhaps you can be more self-sufficient. And additionally, Jupiter's moving through Cancer as well. So you perhaps been getting used to the Cancer over the last year. From a Sagittarian perspective, Jupiter in Cancer. It's been quite an intense time. But hopefully, you've become aware of the power and utility of your feelings, including some of your deeper feelings. And so the Sun moving through Cancer, moving into Cancer, may sort of complement Jupiter in the sign, at least while Jupiter is in Cancer, because in just over a week, certainly less than a fortnight, Jupiter moves out of Cancer into Leo. So Sun moving into Cancer, all things being equal, does make you sort of more intense, more powerful, perhaps more sort of emotional as well, but emotional in a positive sense. And so that's perhaps the next couple of weeks. There is this changeover over the weekend, and throughout the weekend we have the Moon moving through Virgo. And so with the Moon moving through Virgo, it is an Earth sign. It understands the importance of the material world, and so Moon in Virgo is trying to address that world. And I think you're just very aware of what is happening, and you kind of want an impact. And you might find yourself over the weekend being quite ambitious. I know it's the weekend; things are supposed to slow down, but you're perhaps thinking ahead, thinking about what has not been achieved, perhaps stuff that you were supposed to have done earlier in the week and you haven't got it together, that you can't help but think about it. And the Moon in Virgo makes sextile to Mercury. It also makes a sextile to Jupiter, and it makes it also makes a trine to Mars. Now, all of those aspects work in your favour, particularly that Moon sextile Jupiter, because that Moon sextile Jupiter, it just makes you aware of what you could do if you had the chance. And so if on Sunday you come to the conclusion that you could be doing something and you're not doing it, then this might be a great opportunity to start to plan things. Maybe if you can't do it on Sunday itself, you can start sort of thinking about next week what you want to do while Jupiter is still in Cancer. So think about perhaps your desires. It's okay to have desires, and I think with Jupiter in Cancer, the desire principle is actually quite strong. So if you look back over the year, think about what you really want, at an emotional level. And I think that with Moon sextile Jupiter, I think that you can really find a way of achieving it, even though very soon Jupiter will be out of Cancer, but it'll be in Leo soon. And Jupiter in a fire sign, Jupiter in a Sagittarius friendly sign, that's certainly something to be looking forward to. And from a relationship viewpoint, Mercury and Jupiter are making a conjunction. I mean, this conjunction has been developing for some time, and they're less than 5 degrees apart. And don't forget, Jupiter is your ruler. Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. So you could say with Mercury, Jupiter coming together, that might be like you and someone else coming together. It feels that there may be one particular relationship that is really starting to happen. You perhaps can see how you and someone else might have a real connection. But this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction doesn't actually happen because Mercury is slowing down. Mercury is about to go retrograde. So you think that Mercury, the faster planet, would catch up with Jupiter, but it doesn't catch up with Jupiter. It goes retrograde before it has a chance to make the exact conjunction. So maybe there's a possibility here of some kind of misconnection. You feel that something is going on with another person, and I may be talking about anything here. Friendship, romance, business partnership, whatever. Just someone who could be of use to you, a relationship that could work in everyone's favour. So there is this potential there, but on the surface, it doesn't seem to complete. But the moon might bring things together. So what happens is that the moon makes a sextile to Mercury, and then it makes a sextile to Jupiter, and so there is an opportunity here for something to come together over the weekend, and it might be something very focused. It might be you and someone else have something you can do together for a particular reason. So it might well be some temporary partnership, some temporary alliance, and you and someone else, you work together on a particular project, you have a particular goal. Maybe once that goal is achieved, you don't need to have anything more to do with one another, and you can go your separate ways. So do think about other people, and perhaps think about one other person who could do you a lot of good, in the same way that I think that you could do them a lot of good as well. So don't completely ignore the interpersonal dimension. Capricorn. This weekend is the solstice, and that is important for the average Capricorn, because the sun is moving into Cancer. It's moving into your opposite sign. And this may say something not just about the weekend, but also about the next month. Although when I say the weekend, I'm thinking really about Sunday rather than Saturday. I mean, the sun moves into Cancer on Sunday at 9:25 a.m. London time, which would be sort of 1:25 in the morning if you're in California. So on Saturday, the sun is still moving through late Gemini. So with the sun moving through Cancer, all things being equal, it can be a time when the average Capricorn has to think about other people and their influence on you. The various the various people in your life, the various characters in your personal drama, and they're having an influence on you. And you just might find also, Capricorn, that your expectations are higher than usual. Well, in fact, you could say that your expectations have been higher than usual for some time, for over a year, because Jupiter has been moving through Cancer since last summer. Still there. Jupiter's still in Cancer. We've got another week or more of Jupiter in Cancer before it moves into Leo at the end of the month. And so you could then say that the Sun in Cancer is now in the same sign as Jupiter in Cancer, as well as Mercury in Cancer. So the interpersonal dimension really might start be sort of becoming important. Of course, to an extent, this does depend on your particular situation. And if you're a hermit, it might not seem to be so relevant. But if there are people around you, if you're a sociable person, if you're in relationships, if you're trying to be in relationships, then the interpersonal dimension, cannot be ignored, and you do need to think not just about your expectations, but also what other people are doing and how you respond to them. And it just may be a time when you have to not necessarily be quite so active as usual. I mean, active. What's the opposite of active? Well, responsive maybe. Because if you look at the chart, of a broad Capricorn chart, you will notice that right now most of the planets are on the right of the chart. And so when you've got a lot of planets on the right, that can suggest the other, the left part of the chart, the part of the chart towards Capricorn is about you and what you are trying to initiate. And then the part of a chart towards Cancer is perhaps what other people are trying to initiate. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you should just do what you're told, follow the crowd. It's not like that. It's just about being responsive to other people's needs and understanding them. And don't forget, some of the most powerful people in history, for better or for worse, are incredibly responsive to other people's needs. They understand other people's needs. It doesn't mean to say they give in to their needs, but they at least understand their audience. And I think, Capricorn, if you have an audience, however small that audience is, I think you do have that just general awareness of what is going on, and that can give you an advantage. And if we're talking about the sign Cancer, we have a conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter in Cancer. So there's Mercury at 23 degrees 30 Cancer, and then midnight on Sunday, Jupiter at 28:05. So Mercury and Jupiter are less than 5 degrees apart, and it's taking place in your opposite sign. So this could be about not just benefiting from other people, but having really good communications with other people. I mean, that is certainly a possibility. But, this conjunction never happens because Mercury is slowing down. And so on the face of it, your ability to communicate, or the opportunity to communicate with certain people, may be starting to fray. Maybe just there's a possibility that someone is drifting out of contact. But the moon comes in and kind of arguably saves the day, because the moon makes a sextile to Mercury, and also the moon makes a sextile to Jupiter. And so with those two sextiles, the moon is doing what it does best. And what the moon is in a chart, its function. It's how things come together. It's how things talk to each other. Because, the moon is a communication planet along with Mercury. And so there is a chance to talk, even over quite long distances. So if you feel isolated, that you feel you can't get hold of someone, well, I think it's important not to panic, because there is a way. And we might be talking about long distance communication. We might be talking about communication that happens at an unusual level, maybe even a sort of a spiritual or a telepathic level, whatever it is. You can get through, and you can be understood. And while all this is going on, Capricorn, there is a bit of pressure. I think this pressure is kind of building up over the weekend. You feel that something perhaps just has to give, that something is not quite good enough, and you want to force the pace. And I think if you do want to force the pace, I think it's important that you recognize this. Don't just put it to one side. You don't want to cause any fuss, because if you put things to one side, if you deliberately try to stay out of trouble, the tension hasn't gone away. You still want to force the pace, but that desire to force the pace, is perhaps, being repressed. It can be frustrating. You can see what needs to be done. You can see everything that needs to be done. And you can also see perhaps that there's no cooperation. You're not getting the support you need. That can be frustrating. You'd love to say something, but part of you feels you should just hold fire. But then, that would be frustrating, and it might cause an explosion later on. So if you feel that something needs to be brought out into the open, needs to be discussed, needs to be talked about, then probably it's not a good idea to delay, because otherwise just the pressure just intensifies, and that is really not very satisfactory. I'd also say, Capricorn, that it's not a time to be doing anything reckless. It's not a time for taking risks. It's certainly not a time for putting your life into other people's hands. Absolutely not. Because if you are in a situation that is physically risky, then you could say, well, if it can go wrong, it might well go wrong. So on a physical level, keep it simple. Don't do something you've never done before. Plenty of preparation is required. Don't be in too much of a hurry. If you're feeling angry for whatever reason, don't do anything that's safety critical. I'm sure things will be fine, but I just felt some obligation to point that out. Now, at the end of the weekend and into next week, we have a first quarter moon. So we've got the sun in Cancer, and we got the moon moving into Libra. I mean, for most of the weekend, the moon is in Virgo, but then right at the end, we have that moon in Libra, and that first quarter moon might be about pressure, but perhaps constructive pressure, because when we're talking about first quarter moon, you have the new moon. The new moon is the beginning of something, the beginning of a new lunar cycle. But the first quarter moon is when you're asking, well, okay, now what? You had the big ideas, but where is the action? And that might be something you're really starting to think about. And this might relate to other people as well. It's not just what you are doing, it's what other people are doing, what other people are not doing. And certain people could be frustrating, or at least they might appear to be frustrating. And I know that I've just said that you are quite responsive at the moment, and perhaps you need to be responsive, but you don't want to be too responsive, because you've got your ambitions, you've got things you want to achieve, and you've got to take everyone with you. You've got to make it clear that you want to sort of follow your particular agenda, but you've got to also make sure that you are being listened to, that you can be listened to. And if you want to listen, if you want to be listened to, then you have to be responsive. So you have to get that balance right. But that first quarter moon, which really the new week starts with, could be some kind of crisis, and it could be a crisis regarding other people and whether or not you're getting enough support from them. But I think it's a crisis that you can resolve, and I think that there can be a resolution that really works for you. And so don't give up. Don't feel that everything is so frustrating that nothing can happen. It can happen, and you just have to perhaps make an effort to understand people, and also understand other people's weaknesses and what other people are looking for. And if you can provide it to some extent, then I think things in the end should work out. Aquarius, you are looking for something to happen. I think that's what you want. But are you really thinking it through? I think, Aquarius, this weekend there could be something about you that is a little bit hasty. You want perhaps instant results. You could take things too quickly, and if you're in too much of a hurry, then you might well create a situation which is not desirable. And so if you go out on a limb, if you act when you're feeling angry, then things could go wrong, because there is something rather explosive about the weekend. No, it's not necessarily about there being explosions in your own house, in your own living space, but you can feel the pressure. Now, it might be that you're feeling the pressure in general from the outside world, and you're just picking up on it. So it's possible that it is operating like that. But if you do anything which is unwise, that you haven't thought through, then there is a good chance that it goes wrong. And I think that it is a pretty bad day to be, or bad weekend to be taking risks. So be careful in terms of physical activity. Also be careful in terms of journeys. You might take a short distance journey, maybe by car. It could be some other means, to foot, bicycle, bus, whatever, and it might seem straightforward. You're doing something on the spur of a moment, and it just might not be as simple as you had imagined. So I would probably be inclined to avoid unnecessary travelling over the weekend. And this is particularly the case if you're feeling annoyed. So that would really suggest that driving, for example, or some form of transport where you are the one directly in control. I mean, driving, cycling, flying. I don't think flying, but driving, cycling. Does it have to be done? Maybe you should wait before doing anything dramatic. Because it just could be that what seems like a routine journey could just be more trouble than it's worth, and at the very least could just make you feel annoyed. And that's not what you want. And it's probably better, Aquarius, that you just you stay where you are. You feel you. Because I think your emotions are quite strong at the moment. There's a lot that you are picking up on, and at the same time, I think you're going to be good at making up for lost time. So if you feel that recently a lot of time has been wasted, there are a lot of things that are unfinished, then now I think would be a great time for sorting it all out. You don't have to make a big exhibition of it. Maybe it's a weekend. There's perhaps less pressure, at least less pressure from the outside world. I think you might be pressurizing yourself. So if there's less pressure, if things are more in control, you are more in control, then you create an environment that you feel comfortable with, and it just makes you feel better. And then as you move into next week, things are easier. And of course, we've got the sun moving into Cancer, and with the sun moving into Cancer, it very often is a time, Aquarius, maybe just this time of year, but perhaps more so than usual, because Jupiter is in Cancer as well, and of course Mercury is in Cancer too. So with all this emphasis on Cancer, it perhaps is about you looking after your security and emotional needs, just making sure that everything is placed as it should be. If there's anything that's chaotic or disorganized that's been building up, then now Aquarius is a great time to be sorting it all out. Pisces. There is a sign change, of course. The big sign change is the sun moving out of Gemini and into Cancer. And I think this sign change, which is of course the solstice, works for you. It makes things more interesting, and it might feel that you've done the time, you've done the work, you're feeling more settled. That's a problem with the Sun in Gemini. So while the Sun has been in Gemini, there have just been things to work out, and you perhaps didn't want to take too many risks. You wanted to focus on making sure that you were feeling secure. Maybe this is what happens every time the Sun moves into Gemini, but of course this time round you've had Uranus in Gemini as well. So with Uranus in Gemini, you're still getting used to Uranus in Gemini, and Uranus in Gemini, of course, stays in Gemini until 2032. So with Uranus in Gemini, you perhaps were unsure about certain things. You became aware that there were things that needed to be changed, and you could see the potential for change, really quite fundamental change, that might be affecting, your roots, where you lived, the ground under your feet. And while the Sun was in Gemini as well, you felt that tension and that pressure. But now the Sun is moving out of Gemini into Cancer. It's moving into a water sign. You are a water sign. It's moving into the same sign as Jupiter. Jupiter, your ruler, still in Cancer. And so, Jupiter is getting ready to move into Leo, but having the Sun and Jupiter in the same sign, the Sun isn't too close to Jupiter, so it's not like Jupiter is being damaged by the Sun. It's not like we've got any sort of combustion, or as traditional astrologers would say, Jupiter is not under sunbeams immediately. So that's nothing to worry about. And I think it's time to think about what you are, who you are, what you can do, what action you can take. And we're talking about creative action. And at the moment, Pisces, particularly on Sunday rather than Saturday, I think there is a lot you can do. There's a lot you can make happen, and I think to an extent you are going to want to force the pace, particularly at the end of a weekend, and you might have to ask yourself, well, how far can you go? I mean, to an extent you've got to consider other people. I mean, after all, the moon is in Virgo. But just because you can have to consider other people doesn't mean you have to follow their lead. In fact, with the moon making a sextile to Jupiter, moon making a sextile to Mercury, I think that you and other people are, by and large, following the same direction. It's not like one party is forcing another party to do something they don't want to do. I think that there is a general feeling of consensus, and additionally, Mercury and Jupiter are making a conjunction to one another. Although this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction never makes it, because Mercury is slowing down, ready to go retrograde, the moon brings Mercury and Jupiter together. And so this actually might bode quite well for relationships. So relationships this weekend, particularly on Sunday, can really work well. So on Sunday, try to be with other people, or at least be with another person, the right other person, not just any person, but see what other people have to offer. Try to look for the common ground, and if a relationship is important to you, then on Sunday maybe you can do something really constructive, and you might find that the other person is in a pretty sort of good frame of mind. And well, if you want to get closer to someone, if you're looking for a new relationship, well, I probably Sunday might be as good a day as any, probably a better day than most days. So if I had to sort of rate Sunday from a relationship perspective, as one sometimes does, give it a star rating, I'd probably give it a 4-star rating, or even perhaps a 5-star rating. So yeah, Sunday dinner. Try not to spend Sunday alone, because I think it could be quite a good day when I think that your social skills are going to be at the top of the range. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So, I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 16, which is contentment. So contentment is how Greg Winkup, in his translation of I Ching, that's how he describes this this hexagram. In the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, it's enthusiasm. And we get the idea with this hexagram that perhaps there's a tendency for complacency. We might just be thinking that everything is fine. I mean, deep down, we might know that it's actually not fine, but nonetheless, it's okay. We'll just muddle through. And if we're feeling good today, or if we're feeling good this weekend, well, that's enough. And of course, if one looks at it in terms of enthusiasm, I mean, the problem with enthusiasm as a concept is that, we can get very excited about something, but on what basis? We can get excited about something that perhaps has no chance of being realized. Or if it were to be realized, if it were to have any possibility of being realized, then excitement is perhaps the wrong approach. We have to be perhaps more methodical, and we certainly should not be complacent. But although it can be a problem hexagram, the moving lines are actually quite good. So we have the second line moving, and we also have the fourth line moving. And the second line suggests that we're not so stupid as to be overexcited or to be complacent. In fact, we are not content, certainly not in a complacent way. And we realize that we cannot be deluded. People might say lots of nice stuff, and it's easy to just accept what people say at face value. But we're not going to be fooled by that. We're not going to be led off the path. We are realistic, and that I think is really important. I think the fact that we're realistic right from the beginning means that some of the dangers of complacency, seem to be mitigated. Yeah, I mean, I think that we are being encouraged to be complacent. We would like to be complacent, but I don't think we're going to be complacent. And what the I Ching says about this line is, it's as solid as a rock. So we can be as solid as a rock and as realistic as a rock as well. And then the fourth line moves. And, the fourth line is, you can see that it's quite an important line. Because in this hexagram, this hexagram of contentment, you see 5 of the 6 lines are broken. And so with 5 out of 6 lines broken, there is a certain passivity to this hexagram, just seeing how things develop and hoping for the best. But the fourth line is unbroken, and that's perhaps the key movement in this hexagram. And it's certainly about being enthusiastic, but we can also be more than that. We can be quite inspiring. And so if we're inspiring and we're realistic, then I think people are going to trust us. And there might actually be quite a social aspect to this hexagram. Maybe we can encourage other people to get involved with some kind of common endeavour. And we know the dangers, we know the pitfalls, but it should be okay. So with 2 moving lines, that means we move to a second hexagram, and that hexagram is hexagram number 7, which is the army. And that really does show the development here. there's no complacency to the army. We know that there's a task that needs to be achieved. We know it's going to be difficult. We know that perhaps we need other people's help, and we know our responsibility, because that is the army. We're part of some wider structure. We're perhaps even part of a hierarchy, and so with other people, as part of a group, as a collective project, then I think it's likely that we can get results. And even if we're doing stuff on our own, the army might just represent methodical organization. We are part of a system, part of our own system, where we have got our own role in that system. It's not about just doing whatever we want. It's not about being chaotic. It means following orders, following our own orders perhaps, and we just do it, and we're not complacent, and in the end we can see it through. And that's all I've got to say about this weekend. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'm super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.